Your wife won't survive this divorce if she keeps fighting. That was the sentence, the one I heard with my own ears, spoken by the man I had been married to for over 30 years. I stood frozen behind the garage door, my hand trembling, not sure if it was from the cold or from the truth I had just uncovered. I thought I knew my husband. I thought I understood the man I built a life with, but that night shattered everything. What I didn't know was that my daughter heard it too. I didn't know she had installed a tiny hidden camera in our home because she feared for my safety, and I had no idea she would keep that recording all the way to the divorce hearing, saving it for the exact moment the truth needed a voice. When the screen lit up, the entire courtroom fell silent. And me? My heart pounded like a funeral drum. Mom, you need to see this. That was the moment I finally understood. The truth doesn't just set you free, it destroys every lie you were taught to live with. The first thing I remember about that morning was the way the courthouse hallway smelled, like cold air, old paper, and somebody's strong peppermint gum. I stood there in my dark navy dress, clutching my purse like a shield, trying to steady my breath before walking into the courtroom where my marriage would end. Inside, everything looked too bright. The overhead lights felt harsh, almost judgmental, as if they could see right through my skin to every bruise, every disappointment, every silent night I had survived in that house. My husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, sat across the room with his lawyer. He didn't look nervous. He looked prepared. Prepared to win, prepared to take what he wanted, prepared to make me look like the confused, fragile woman he'd been telling everyone I had become. He didn't even look my way. Not once. I kept my eyes low, hands folded, trying to keep calm, until I heard the scrape of a chair beside me. My daughter sat down, her hand slipping into mine, warm and steady. She whispered, "Mom, just breathe. Whatever happens today, you're not alone." But her voice, there was something tight underneath it. Not fear, purpose. Before I could ask what was wrong, the bailiff called the room to order. Everyone rose. The judge entered, stern, focused, the type who didn't tolerate nonsense. We sat, and the hearing began like any other. My husband's lawyer standing to paint a picture of a poor man trapped in a difficult marriage, a man who supposedly had concerns about his wife's ability to manage complex decisions. A subtle way of saying I was losing my mind. I felt a sting behind my eyes, but I swallowed it. I refused to cry. Not for him. Not today. Then it happened. My husband stood, cleared his throat, and spoke in that calm, rehearsed voice I once trusted. He said, "Your Honor, I only want what's best for my wife. She's been forgetful, confused, unstable. I fear she can't keep herself safe anymore." A soft gasp rippled through the room. Not loud, but real. People knew me. People had seen me. People had watched him pull away for years. But he kept going. He said I needed supervision. He said I should not control my own finances. He said my daughter shouldn't be influenced by my emotional instability. Every word was a nail hammered into the coffin he had been trying to build around my life. I didn't flinch, but my daughter did. Her shoulders tightened, her jaw locked. Her fingers squeezed mine so hard it almost hurt. Then she stood. Just stood. Without being asked, without waiting for permission. She addressed the court in a trembling but clear voice. "Your Honor, may I present evidence?" Her father turned, shocked. "What are you doing?" he hissed. She didn't even look at him. Instead, she handed a small flash drive to the clerk. "I have a video," she said, "recorded inside our home. It concerns my mother's safety, and I believe the court needs to see it." The room shifted. Everyone leaned forward, not dramatically but instinctively, drawn in by the tension suddenly thick as smoke. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Is this relevant to the claims made today?" My daughter nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. It shows conversations my father never expected anyone to hear." A murmur broke out. My husband finally stood, panic rising in his voice. "This is unnecessary." But the judge lifted a hand, stopping him cold. "I'll decide that." The clerk plugged in the drive. The lights dimmed. The screen on the wall flickered to life, casting a ghostly blue glow across everyone's faces. My heart thudded so loudly I could feel it in my fingertips. I didn't know what clip she had chosen. I didn't know what she had heard. I didn't know if I was ready. My daughter leaned close, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom, this is the night he thought you were asleep." And then, with a single click, the video began to play. A grainy image of my own living room appeared on the screen, the silhouette of my husband pacing, and then his voice, low and cold, echoed across the courtroom. "Your wife won't survive this divorce if she keeps fighting." Gasps, hands covering mouths, chairs shifting, and me. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Everything that followed was no longer a divorce hearing. It was the beginning of truth finally stepping into the light. When the courtroom fell silent, I felt something inside me go hollow. Not fear, not shame. Something older, deeper, like a crack spreading through a wall that had been holding for too long. But to understand why that video mattered, why those words from my husband hit like a knife to the spine, you'd have to know where I came from. You would have to know me. My name is Evelyn Brooks, and I am 62 years old. Born in Macon, Georgia. Raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to press my hair on Saturday nights, teach me about dignity, and remind me every Sunday morning that God sees everything, even the things we hide from ourselves. I spent my whole life believing that if you gave enough love, worked hard enough, prayed hard enough, your family would stand by you. That belief carried me through every storm until it didn't. I met Charles, my husband, when I was 25. He was handsome, smooth-talking, and confident in a way I wasn't. A man who made promises like they were warm biscuits on a Sunday table. Easy, sweet, and meant to be trusted. For a long time, I thought he saved me. Truth is, I saved him far more times than I ever saved myself. We didn't have much at the beginning, but what we did have, we built together. Our home, our daughter, our life. And for years, he was the man I believed God sent me. Gentle, steady, protective, the kind of man who opened jars, fixed leaks, and kissed my forehead when I was too tired to speak. But life has a way of showing you the truth in slow, painful inches before ripping the veil clean off. It started small. Small enough that I didn't question it. A late night here, a short temper there, a cold silence settling between us, like the first hint of winter. Then, after my mother passed 5 years ago, I noticed something shifting inside him. Or maybe it had always been there, and my grief just made it clearer. He started handling the bills without asking, taking calls outside, going quiet whenever I asked simple questions, things that felt off. But when you've spent decades keeping a family together, you learn how to ignore the cracks, or paint over them. I thought he was stressed. I thought it was work. I thought marriage just went through cold seasons. But the truth was darker than a season. It was a pattern. My daughter, Maya, she's 28 now, grew up watching more than I ever realized. She always had her father's smile, but my mother's intuition, sharp as a sewing needle and twice as unforgiving when it hit the truth. A year before the divorce hearing, she came home early from a trip and found him arguing on the phone. Not the loud kind of argument, the quiet, dangerous kind. The kind men have when they believe no one is listening. After that, she started paying attention. Closer than I did, she asked me questions like, "Mom, do you feel safe at home? Has Dad ever threatened you? Do you ever wake up afraid?" I laughed them off, because that's what women my age do. We swallow fear like warm tea, slowly, quietly, hoping it will disappear if we don't name it. But Maya didn't swallow anything. She watched, she listened, she waited. And eventually, she heard enough to know something was truly wrong. People often assume women my age can't possibly be in danger, that we're too old, too wise, too used to life to fall into the traps younger women face. But the truth? Abuse doesn't care about age. Manipulation doesn't care about wrinkles. And danger doesn't knock softer just because you're 62. I didn't see the red flags, but Maya did. And she carried that weight alone, shouldering a fear no daughter should ever carry for her mother, until the night she recorded that video, the night my husband's mask finally slipped, the night she heard him speak as if my life, my actual life, was an obstacle he needed to remove. So when she stood in that courtroom, flash drive in hand, jaw tight with a mixture of anger and heartbreak, I realized something. She wasn't just trying to help me win a divorce. She was trying to keep me alive. And that realization cut deeper than anything my husband ever said. Because for the first time, I understood that while I had spent years trying to protect my family, my daughter had been the one quietly protecting me. And the wounds I carried weren't just from a broken marriage. They were from years of believing I didn't deserve to be protected in the first place. The first real sign, the one I should have paid attention to, came on a Tuesday morning in early spring. The kind of morning when dew clings to the grass and the Georgia sky looks soft, like someone painted it with powdered blue chalk. I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing berries for breakfast. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Just a quiet, ordinary morning in a quiet, ordinary house. Then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A small click, not loud, not sharp, but distinct, like a door closing softly. Or someone moving in a room where no one was supposed to be. I turned off the faucet and listened. Silence. Too much silence. The kind that crawls under your skin and stays there. I called out, "Well, Charles, you home?" No answer. He had told me he left early for a meeting. So why did something feel off? I walked through the hallway, each step slow, careful. Not because I expected danger. No, that wasn't a thought I allowed myself back then. It was more like a cold whisper brushing the back of my neck. A sense. A shift in the air, like the house was holding its breath. When I reached the downstairs guest room, I noticed the door was cracked open. Charles always closed it. Always. He hated when rooms looked unfinished. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed, except the lamp on the nightstand. It was slightly turned, angled toward the bed. Not enough for most people to notice, but I noticed. And because I cleaned that room. I know where everything belongs. My stomach tightened, but I told myself I was imagining things. He was looking for something, I whispered. He probably just forgot to fix it. But that was the beginning. The start of objects shifting by an inch, doors left unlatched, a faint smell of a woman's perfume on his shirts that he said was from someone at work hugging him goodbye. Little things, always little things, small enough to dismiss but heavy enough to sink inside me like pebbles in water. A few weeks later, I found the first lie. Nothing dramatic, just a credit card receipt tucked beneath the mail pile. Dinner for two, at a restaurant we used to go to on our anniversaries. I picked it up carefully like it might burn me. He had been there the same night he told me he worked late. Same night I fell asleep alone on the sofa waiting for him, the TV buzzing in the background, my dinner plate going cold on the coffee table. When he came home that night, I asked if he wanted the food I kept warm for him. He kissed my cheek and said, "Sweetheart, you didn't have to do that. I ate at the office." That memory hit me like a brick. He looked right into my face when he said it. Right into my eyes. I tucked the receipt away in my dresser drawer, pressed between two folded sweaters, hidden like the doubts I was trying to bury. But the most disturbing moment came from someone who had no reason to lie. Our neighbor, Miss Pearl, an older woman with sharp eyes and an endless supply of iced tea, stopped me one afternoon when I went out to water the plants. She leaned over the fence and asked, "Baby, y'all doing okay over there?" I smiled politely. "We're fine, Miss Pearl." "Why, you ask?" She hesitated, bit her lip, then whispered, "I've seen him coming home late. Not from the front door, from the side gate. And he always looks around first, like he don't want nobody seeing him." My heart sank, but I still wasn't ready to believe her. After all, this was my husband, my partner, the man I built my life with. So I thanked her, forced a smile, and pretended my world wasn't cracking. But that night I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because a new feeling had settled inside me. Suspicion. Cold, quiet, steady, the kind that grows roots fast once it finds soil. Then came the moment that changed everything. I woke up around 2 a.m. The house was dark, silent, but I heard someone talking downstairs. A voice so low I couldn't make out the words. I thought maybe Charles was on a phone call, so I went to check, thinking maybe I'd ask him if everything was all right. But when I reached the top of the stairs, I froze. He wasn't on the phone. He was talking to someone in person. A silhouette sat on our living room sofa. A woman's silhouette. I didn't see her face, didn't hear her voice. But I heard his, tight, angry, and nothing like the voice he used for me anymore. He said, "She still trusts me. She doesn't suspect a thing." Something inside me cracked open right then, quietly, silently, but permanently. I backed away without making a sound, returned to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed in complete darkness, feeling my pulse drum in my throat. That night was the first time I truly felt unsafe in my own home. But I didn't tell Maya. I didn't call anyone. I did what women my age are taught to do. I kept quiet and hoped I was wrong. But Maya was already watching, already listening, already preparing for the truth I kept trying to ignore. And soon, she would give me proof no mother ever wants to see. People think life-changing moments arrive with thunder, with shouting, with broken glass, with someone slamming a door and announcing the end. But mine arrived quietly, in a plain white envelope, thin enough to fold in half, heavy enough to change everything I believed. It was a Saturday morning, rain tapping lightly on the windows, the kind of slow southern rain that makes you want to stay in bed and let time stretch itself out. Charles had gone out early for errands. He always had errands lately. Errands that lasted longer than they should. Errands that returned with silence and excuses. I walked into my closet reaching for a sweater when something slipped off the shelf and landed near my foot. An envelope, unmarked, sealed, tucked between two shoe boxes where it didn't belong. At first I thought it was one of my old bills or birthday cards, but when I picked it up, I knew immediately it wasn't mine. My name wasn't on it. No return address, no seal I recognized. Just an envelope that felt like it had been waiting for me. My heart thudded in that quiet room, soft at first, then harder, like it was pounding out a warning in Morse code. I opened it. Slowly, carefully, like peeling back the truth. Inside were papers, documents I had never seen before, a list of assets, accounts, insurance policies, property titles, all with my name on them, but signatures I didn't remember signing, dates that didn't match my memory, transfers that shouldn't have existed. My handwriting, but not my hand. My breath caught, my vision blurred. I sank onto the edge of the bed, papers trembling between my fingers. Someone had forged my name. Repeatedly, confidently, like they expected me never to notice. There, in bold letters, was a document assigning temporary financial management to Charles in case of mental decline or cognitive instability. My hands went cold. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't a bad marriage. This was a plan, a long one, a patient one, a plan to remove me from my own life. I felt something break open inside. Not panic, not anger, but a quiet, steady clarity. I whispered to myself, "He's preparing to erase me." I didn't want Maya to see me like that, but she must have heard my footsteps pacing upstairs. She knocked softly. "Mom, you okay?" I opened the door, papers still in my hand. The moment she saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She guided me to sit, knelt beside me, and took the envelope gently, like she was afraid it might cut me. She read every page, her eyes widened, her jaw tightened. When she finished, she looked at me, not with fear, but with knowing. "Mom, this is why I installed the camera." I felt the room spin. What camera? She swallowed hard, biting her lip like she'd been keeping this secret for too long. The one in the living room, and another in the hallway. I didn't want to scare you, but something hasn't been right with Dad for months. He's not acting like a man who just fell out of love. He's acting like someone who wants control. Control. That word landed like a stone. She continued, I heard him on the phone one night. I heard him talking about the accounts, about you. I recorded it, Mom. I didn't want to, but I had to. My world stopped. A daughter shouldn't have to protect her mother like that. A daughter shouldn't have to spy in her own home. But mine had, because I hadn't protected myself, because I believed loyalty would save me even when love had already died. That night, after Maya went to her room, I sat alone in the living room, lights off, just me and the sound of rain against the windows. I held the envelope in my lap. My hands were still shaking. I looked around the house. The family photos on the wall, the couch where we used to watch movies, the dining table that had seen birthdays and Christmas dinners. Suddenly, every object felt like evidence. Every memory felt contaminated. Every shadow seemed to whisper that I had been blind longer than I wanted to admit. And then, I felt it again. A presence. A shift. Like someone was standing just out of sight. But when I looked, there was no one. Just the quiet house. And the little camera Maya had hidden near the bookshelf. Silent, blinking, watching. For the first time, I wasn't sure if it was there to protect me or to warn me. But I knew one thing. The envelope in my hands wasn't the whole truth. It was only the beginning. The night everything truly snapped into focus didn't start with shouting. It didn't start with a slammed door or a confession or even an argument. It started with a whisper, a sound so soft I almost missed it. It was near midnight, The house was quiet except for the old clock in the hallway ticking slow and heavy, the kind of ticking that feels louder when your heart is unsettled. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the envelope, to the forged signatures, to the insurance documents that named Charles as the beneficiary in case of mental decline. In case of. Those words were burned into my eyes every time I blinked. I walked downstairs to get some water, hoping the cool kitchen tiles would calm me, but halfway down the staircase I heard it. That whispering. Not angry, not urgent, just secretive. Rhythmic, like someone murmuring instructions. The voice was unmistakable. My husband's. I stopped in the dark, listening, heart thudding like it wanted out of my chest. The sound was coming from the living room, right where Maya had placed the hidden camera. I inched closer, each step careful, light, slow. And then I saw it. Charles pacing. Phone to his ear. Tone flat, calm, far too calm for the things he was saying. I pressed myself against the wall just out of sight. Yes, he said quietly. It's almost done. No, she has no idea. A pause, a long one. So long I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. She's showing signs already, he continued. The forgetfulness, the confusion, the hesitation. It'll be easy to prove she's not stable. My lungs tightened as if the air around me had thickened. He was talking about me, about symptoms I didn't have, a narrative he was creating, planting, constructing, carefully. He kept pacing, running his hand through his hair the way he does when he's planning something. He always did that, before business meetings, before difficult conversations, before manipulating a situation so he'd come out looking innocent. The man on the other end asked him something. I couldn't hear it. Charles said, yes, the documents are already in motion. Once the hearing goes through, I'll have full control. Full control. Something in my stomach dropped, a cold, nauseating freefall. The man continued, his voice too faint to make out. Charles responded, no, she won't fight it. She trusts me. She's soft. She always has been. His laugh, quiet, low, sickening, echoed in that dark room. He added, and even if she does try to resist, she won't survive this divorce if she keeps fighting. There it was. The sentence. The one I heard in the garage days later. The one Maya captured. The one that shook the courtroom. But here, in the dark, before the world knew, it felt even more dangerous, more intimate, more real, because I wasn't supposed to hear it. Not yet. Not ever. I backed away slowly, praying the floorboards didn't creak, praying he didn't look up, praying I could make it to safety before he sensed I was there. When I reached the stairs, my legs nearly gave out. I had to grip the railing just to steady myself. I climbed each step mechanically, one foot, then the other, until I reached Maya's door. Without thinking, without knocking, I opened it. She was awake, sitting in bed, knees pulled up to her chest, eyes red as if she'd been crying for hours. When she saw my face, she didn't ask what was wrong. She already knew. She had known for weeks. She whispered, "You heard him, didn't you?" I nodded. Barely. The kind of nod that doesn't come from your neck. It comes from your bones. She motioned for me to close the door, then pulled me into the room, her movements frantic but gentle. "Mom," she said, voice trembling, "I've been recording him for months." She reached into her nightstand and pulled out a small external hard drive. "There's more," she whispered. "A lot more." She opened her laptop, clicked a folder labeled "For Safety." And there it was. A library of videos, audio recordings, screenshots, copies of documents she had secretly saved in case everything went wrong. She clicked one file, a clip taken 2 weeks earlier. It showed Charles sitting in the same living room chair, talking to the same unknown man. Only this time his words were even clearer. "Yes," he said, "I've already moved the money. Once the judge signs off, it won't matter what she wants." Then, a pause, a long one. "She won't be in the way much longer." My breath hitched, a sharp, painful sound I didn't mean to make. Maya took my hand. "Shh. Mom, we're okay. I'm here. I've got you." Her voice, steady but breaking, was the only thing holding me to the room, to my body, to reality. I whispered, "I can't believe he would do this." She squeezed my hand. "Mom, I think he's been planning this longer than we realized. I looked at the screen again, at the man I thought I knew, the man I shared a bed with, a life with, a child with. And I realized something terrifying. He wasn't unraveling. He wasn't losing control. He wasn't reacting. He was executing, step by step, piece by piece, like a man building a story where I was the fragile wife and he was the savior, a story he planned to finish in that courtroom. But he didn't know Maya was watching. He didn't know she had collected every word, every whisper, every plot. He didn't know the trap he set for me was already collapsing back onto him. And as the truth played out on that laptop screen, I understood the most painful part. I hadn't lost my husband. I had lost the illusion of him. There are nights that carve themselves into your memory so deeply you feel them long after they're over. Nights when the world is quiet, too quiet, and every breath feels heavier than the last. This was one of those nights. After Maya showed me the recordings, she begged me to lie down, to rest, to just breathe for a moment. But how do you breathe when the air in your lungs suddenly feels borrowed? I went to my bedroom, closed the door softly, and sank onto the edge of the bed the same way a drowning person grabs anything that floats. My hands wouldn't stay still, my legs trembled, my heart felt too loud, like it wasn't beating inside my chest but against it, trying to escape. For the first time in my life I felt afraid in my own home. Not startled, not anxious, afraid. Afraid of the man sleeping just down the hall. Afraid of how calmly he spoke about my life as if it were a puzzle he could rearrange. Afraid of how long he'd been planning, and how close I'd come to never waking up to the truth. I buried my face in my hands. Not crying, just collapsing, quietly. You get to a certain age and people expect you to be strong simply because you've survived this long. But that night I didn't feel strong. I felt used, manipulated, discarded, and worst of all, ashamed that I hadn't seen the danger sooner. As I sat there, the rain started again. Gentle at first, then heavier, like the sky was pouring out everything I couldn't. The sound filled the room. A long, steady hush, almost comforting, almost holy. I whispered into the empty space, God, is this really happening to me? My voice sounded small, like a stranger's voice. I didn't recognize the woman sitting on that bed, the woman who spent decades giving, forgiving, and believing love could fix anything. But love wasn't what I saw on those recordings. Love wasn't what was hiding in that envelope. Love wasn't pacing around my living room, plotting how to make me disappear on paper and then in real life. So what was it? Control? Greed? Resentment? Or worse? A man who looked at his wife like she was a burden instead of a partner. The kind of man my mother warned me about when she told me, "Baby, some people don't break your heart. They drain your soul." I finally understood what she meant. Too late. But I understood. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I dragged myself to the mirror. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see if I still looked like myself. Maybe I wanted proof I hadn't disappeared already. My reflection startled me. My eyes looked older, not from age, from betrayal, from fear, from the weight of a man who had been chiseling pieces of me away one decision at a time. I touched the mirror, my fingertips cold against the glass, and whispered, "When did I stop protecting you?" For years I had forgiven too quickly, made excuses too easily, and trusted too blindly. I had loved so hard that I didn't notice love wasn't being returned. But as I stared into that mirror, something small, almost invisible, shifted. A spark, a flicker, a thin thread of strength pulling itself back up from the ashes of who I used to be. Not anger, not revenge. Just a quiet resolve that felt steadier than anything I'd felt in months. I whispered, "No more." 2 words, simple, soft, but they landed like a promise, a vow to myself, a vow to the woman in the mirror who deserved protection as much as anyone else in this world. I wasn't ready to fight yet, not fully. Fear still lived in my bones, but a seed had been planted. A decision had been made. I walked back to Maya's room and opened the door gently. She was sitting up, eyes tired, waiting for me. I sat beside her and said, "Maya, I'm ready to hear everything." She nodded as if she had been waiting months to hear those words. And in that moment, in that quiet, fragile moment, I knew rock bottom wasn't just where I had fallen. It was where I had finally opened my eyes. By the time the sun finally rose, I felt like I had aged 10 years. Not in my bones, in my spirit. I walked into the kitchen, still in my robe, still shaken but steadier than I had been the night before. Maya sat at the table, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. Her eyes met mine, worried, tired, protective. "Mom," she said softly, "there's someone you need to talk to." Before I could respond, I heard a knock at the back door. A slow, deliberate knock. Not rushed, not nervous. The kind of knock made by someone confident they belonged where they were. Maya stood up. "I called him last night," she whispered. He said he could help." "Him? Who was him?" When she opened the door, a tall man in a gray suit stepped inside. Not fancy, just clean, pressed and sharp enough to make a statement. He introduced himself. "Mrs. Brooks, I'm attorney Marcus Hale." I recognized his name immediately. He wasn't one of those loud, dramatic lawyers from TV. He was the quiet kind, the kind people in our community whispered about when they needed real help against real danger. He shook my hand gently, his eyes searching mine like he was measuring how much pain I had been carrying. "I'm here because your daughter is smart," he said, "and because what she showed me last night is more serious than you realize." I sat down. My knees felt too weak to hold me. Marcus opened a folder. Not a thick one, but organized, precise. Inside were copies of the forged documents I found, screenshots of my husband's texts Maya had retrieved, and printouts from the recordings. "I've seen cases like this," Marcus said. "Financial abuse of an elder spouse, coercive control, manipulation, and sometimes attempts to create mental decline on paper before it ever exists in reality." The words hit me like cold water. He continued, "This was not spontaneous. Your husband has been preparing a narrative, one that paints you as confused, unstable, forgetful." I swallowed hard, because that was exactly what Charles had been doing. Subtle comments, gentle corrections, tiny seeds planted in front of neighbors, co-workers, even church friends. Marcus leaned forward. What he didn't expect was that you'd have a daughter who paid attention. Maya squeezed my hand. I whispered, "So what do I do now?" Marcus's voice dropped, steady and calm. "You don't confront him, not yet. You don't change your routine. You don't act differently. You play the role he expects you to play until we have enough evidence to dismantle everything." A role. I had spent decades playing roles: wife, mother, peacemaker, giver. But this was different. This was survival. This was war, waged quietly. He slid a small notebook toward me. "I need you to start writing things down. Dates, times, comments he makes, moments that feel off. If he tries to gaslight you, document it." I nodded slowly. Then he handed me a new folder. Inside were papers I had signed. Years ago, when my mother passed. Documents giving me sole inheritance of property and accounts Charles didn't know the full extent of. "These," Marcus said, "are your leverage, your safety, your power." I didn't feel powerful, not yet. But something inside me, something small and coiled, began to unroll. For the next weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the same wife Charles thought he could manipulate. Quiet, compliant, predictable. I cooked dinner, I folded laundry. I asked him how his day was. I didn't question his lies, not once. He thought I was soft. He thought I was blind. He thought he still had me wrapped around his finger. But when he left the house, I became someone else entirely. I met with Marcus. I cataloged evidence. I sorted documents. I learned what each forged signature meant. I connected timelines. I rewired every moment I once ignored into something clear, something sharp, something that finally made sense. I wasn't unraveling. I was waking up. At night, Maya and I sat in her room, knees touching, the glow of her laptop illuminating truths we could no longer deny. We watched the recordings together, not for the pain, but for the patterns. Every whisper, every threat, every lie, every moment he mistook my quiet for weakness. Maya didn't cry anymore. She was past tears. What lived in her eyes now was determination. "You're not alone in this, Mom," she said. "We're going to expose everything." And I believed her. For the first time in a long time, I believed survival wasn't the only option. Justice was possible. Freedom was possible. The woman in the mirror was still bruised, but she was standing. And she wasn't standing alone. Charles kept pacing around the house at night, still whispering into his phone, still confident in his plan. But he didn't know that every step he took was being captured. Every lie was being recorded. Every piece of his blueprint was becoming his own undoing. He didn't know the quiet woman he underestimated was learning to fight in the most dangerous way possible. Silently. And he had no idea that his downfall was already in motion. If you watch someone long enough, really watch them, you start to notice the small things that betray the truth. The tightening of a jaw, the twitch in a hand, the silence between words that used to flow easily. And in those weeks, as I lived my double life in the shadows of my own home, those small things started to appear like cracks in glass. Cracks in him. It began with a phone call Charles didn't know I overheard. I was walking down the hallway with a basket of laundry. A prop, really, because I wasn't doing anything as simple as laundry anymore. I was studying him, recording him in my mind, watching his lies unravel thread by thread. He was in the guest room, the door half open, speaking in a sharp whisper. "No, I don't understand what the delay is. You told me the paperwork would go through." A pause. He exhaled loudly. A sign of frustration I knew too well. "She's fine," he snapped. "I told you, she's declining. She's confused. She can't keep up with the basic things anymore." My fingers tightened around the laundry basket. Declining. Confused. He was still constructing the story, still writing my obituary in real time, but the person on the other end said something that made him go silent. Completely silent. Then he said, "What do you mean there's a conflicting report?" A chill crawled up my arms. That was Marcus. I knew it instantly. Marcus had already filed legal notices. Not accusations, not charges, but markers. Flags. Documents stating that I was mentally competent, fully functional, and under legal counsel. Charles didn't know that. Not yet, but he did now. And I could hear the fear, the first hint of it, crack through his voice. He ended the call abruptly and walked out of the room, slamming the door hard enough to make the picture frames tremble. It was the first time in years I'd seen a sliver of panic in him, and it wouldn't be the last. Later that week, he started watching me. Not openly, not with concern, but with suspicion. He hovered in the kitchen doorway while I chopped vegetables, eyes scanning my face like he was trying to see if I was slipping the way he had told everyone I was. He'd ask, "Did you take your pills today?" I didn't have any pills. Never did. Or he'd say, "You seem forgetful this morning. Did you sleep well?" I wanted to laugh, or scream, or hold up the recordings Maya had collected and ask him how he slept at night knowing what he was doing. But I didn't. I just smiled softly, the way a woman smiles when she knows more than she's saying. He mistook that smile for weakness. He always had. He didn't realize it was the smile of someone who already knows the ending. A few days later, Maya came home with news. She closed the front door quietly and said, "Mom, something happened." We went into her room, our unofficial war room, and she pulled up footage from one of the cameras. It showed Charles looking through drawers, coat pockets, my purse, my files, my desk, frantic, urgent, searching. For what? The answer came quickly, as we watched him pull out envelopes, shake them, open them, go through every piece of paper like a man hunting for the one thing that could destroy him if it wasn't in his hands. He was looking for the envelope I'd found, the one I'd already given to Marcus. I whispered, "He knows it's missing." Maya nodded. "And he knows you didn't lose it." We watched him tear through the room with a desperation I'd never seen before. For the first time, my fear dipped, just slightly, and something else rose in its place. Power. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that demands attention. The quiet kind. The kind that comes from knowing the truth is shifting in your direction. That evening, he tried to interrogate me. Not directly. He was too calculated for that. He used concern as a disguise. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "I've noticed some things missing lately. Are you moving things around?" "No," I said softly. "Everything seems where it should be." He studied my face like he was trying to find a crack in my calm. He didn't find one. Because I wasn't the same woman who had sat trembling on that bed weeks earlier. I wasn't the wife who swallowed fears whole. I wasn't the woman who believed silence meant peace. I was someone else now. Someone watching him as carefully as he thought he was watching me. Someone preparing for the moment his world would collapse. In the weeks that followed, his life began to unravel. Not because of anything I did, but because lies eventually collapse under their own weight. He couldn't reach the person handling the forged documents. Marcus had already blocked it legally. He couldn't get into accounts that were suddenly flagged for suspicious activity. He couldn't explain why the bank had questions he didn't have answers to. He couldn't understand why the story of my mental decline wasn't sticking the way he expected. The web he had spun was tightening around him, and he had no idea that his wife, the woman he underestimated for decades, was the one holding the last strand, the one he'd choke on. The morning of the hearing felt nothing like the first one. The first time I walked into the courthouse terrified, shaking, unsure, carrying a heart full of bruises and a mind full of doubts. But this time, I walked in steady. Not fearless. No woman who's been betrayed like that is ever truly fearless, but anchored, held up by truth, held up by my daughter, held up by the quiet strength I'd finally claimed. Maya walked beside me, her hand tucked into the crook of my arm like she was guiding me down the aisle of my own resurrection. Marcus met us at the entrance, briefcase in hand, expression unreadable, but I could see the fire behind his eyes. "Today is the day," he said simply. "Let the truth do the heavy lifting." I nodded. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the burden alone. When we stepped into the courtroom, the air felt thick, the kind of thick that comes from expectation, tension, and the muted whisper of people sensing something was about to explode. Charles sat at the opposite table, wearing a suit too sharp and a smile too calm. A rehearsed calm, a predator's calm. His lawyer leaned toward him, murmuring something. Charles didn't look at me, not directly, but when his eyes flicked over for a split second, I saw it. Fear. Just a flicker. Tiny. But there. A crack in the mask. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. The judge entered. Everyone rose. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Then the hearing began. Charles's lawyer stood, buttoned his jacket, and launched into the same performance we'd heard before. My client is deeply concerned for his wife's well-being. She's shown signs of confusion. She is no longer able to make sound decisions. Each sentence was a lie, a carefully practiced one, delivered with the confidence of someone who had no idea the ground beneath him was about to give way. When he finished, the judge turned to my side of the room. "Mrs. Brooks, do you wish to respond?" I started to stand, but before I could, Marcus placed a hand on my arm. He rose for me. "Your Honor, we have evidence to submit." Charles's lawyer frowned. "Evidence? This is a simple dissolution hearing." "No," Marcus said, voice calm but sharp as glass. "There's nothing simple about what has been done to my client." He nodded to Maya, and my daughter, my fierce, brave daughter, stood without hesitation. "Your Honor," she said, "I have a video that needs to be seen." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Not loud, but unmistakably curious. Anticipation shifting through the room like wind. Charles stiffened, his hand tightened around his pen. I saw the knuckles whiten. His mask started to slip. "Your Honor," his lawyer protested, "this is irregular." But the judge lifted a hand. "I will allow it." The clerk took the flash drive, plugged it in. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen on the wall flickered to life. My heart climbed into my throat, not from fear, but from the weight of everything this moment meant. Everything Maya had done, everything we had survived. She stepped closer to me, finger brushing my hand. "You're safe," she whispered, "no matter what happens next." The video began, not with shouting, not with a fight. Just a quiet living room lit by the faint glow of a table lamp. And Charles, my husband, pacing. His voice filled the courtroom. "She won't survive this divorce if she keeps fighting." Gasps, whispers. A stifled cry from somewhere in the back row. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one could ignore. Charles lurched to his feet. "That's taken out of context." But the judge snapped, "Sit down." His voice was cold. Colder than I'd ever heard it. The video continued, more pacing, more plotting. More lines that cut through the room like blades. "She's declining. She's confused. She won't be in the way much longer. I'll have full control soon." Every sentence stripped the mask off him piece by piece. You could feel the shift, the collective shift, as everyone in that room realized they weren't looking at a worried husband. They were looking at a man caught building a cage around his own wife. But the moment that broke him wasn't the video, it was what came after. Marcus stood, walked to the center of the room, and spoke in a voice that vibrated with restrained wrath. Your Honor, these recordings were taken before my client found forged legal documents, assigning her assets to her husband under false claims of mental decline. He placed the forged papers on the judge's desk. And here, he continued, are the copies of her real medical reports from the past year, all confirming perfect mental clarity. The judge flipped through them slowly, face growing darker with each page. Charles's lawyer sputtered, "This is irrelevant." "No," the judge snapped. "This is premeditated fraud." Silence, not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. Punishing silence. Charles's face drained of color. The first real fear flooded into his eyes. Raw, unmasked. Exactly what he'd tried to make me feel for months. Only now, the roles were reversed. The predator was no longer hunting. He was cornered. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was final. "Mr. Brooks, I am ordering an immediate investigation into financial manipulation, coercive control, and elder abuse." Charles's mouth fell open. "Elder? She's not old." The judge didn't even look at him. "I am also granting Mrs. Brooks full protective rights over her accounts, assets, and residence, effective immediately." The gavel hit the desk, a sharp, thunderous crack. And just like that, his empire of lies collapsed. Maya wrapped her arms around me the moment it ended. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't crumble. I simply breathed. A deep, cleansing breath I hadn't taken in years. Because for the first time in decades, I was free, and the man who tried to erase me was finally facing the truth he thought he'd buried. People think justice arrives with sirens, with flashing lights, with a dramatic arrest in the middle of the street. But sometimes, justice arrives in paperwork, in silence, and in the look on a man's face when he realizes the world no longer believes him. And that's exactly how it began. 2 days after the hearing, a pair of investigators from the county's Financial Protection Unit showed up at my door. Not dramatic, not loud, just two calm, collected people with clipboards, cameras, and a list of questions they already knew the answers to. I invited them into the living room, the same living room Charles had paced through while plotting how to erase me. They documented everything, the envelope, the forged signatures, the suspicious transfers, the insurance documents he'd quietly adjusted behind my back. Every paper I handed them felt like a small piece of myself I was reclaiming. Not because I needed revenge, but because I needed the truth written down in ink instead of whispered in the dark. When they finished, one investigator looked at me and said, "Mrs. Brooks, this case won't be hard to prove. He left a trail thinking you'd never follow it." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Validation. The kind that reaches into your bones and tells you, you weren't imagining it. You weren't crazy. You were right. All along. Meanwhile, Charles's world began collapsing the way a poorly built house collapses. Slow at first, then all at once. His accounts were frozen. His access to anything with my name on it was revoked. The bank flagged his activity for fraud review. His business partner, the one he whispered to in the dark, stopped calling back as soon as investigators contacted him. Predators turn on each other quickly when consequences show up. And Charles? He wasn't the confident man who once strutted through our house like he owned every brick of it. He became quiet, withdrawn, jumping at small noises, checking over his shoulder, avoiding neighbors who no longer waved back. The image he'd curated for decades was unraveling thread by thread. One afternoon, I saw him sitting in his car outside the house, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Not from grief, not from regret, from fear. He finally understood that the cage he built for me was closing around him instead. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small when I looked at him. I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel powerless. I just felt done. When the court's protective order arrived, a deputy delivered it with quiet efficiency. He handed me the papers, explained everything, then said, "Ma'am, you're safe now. He can't come within 300 feet of you." 300 feet. Not even a full football field. But to someone who's lived under manipulation for decades, it may as well have been the entire ocean. He wasn't allowed on the property. He wasn't allowed to contact me. He wasn't allowed anywhere near my accounts, my documents, or my life. And suddenly the house felt different. Brighter, lighter, like someone had lifted a curtain I didn't know had been blocking the sun. A week later, my pastor's wife, Mrs. Harding, invited me to sit with her after Sunday service. She held my hand gently and said, "Baby, God doesn't always stop the storm, but He does teach you how to survive it. And sometimes, how to walk out of it stronger. I nodded because I finally understood what she meant. Justice wasn't loud. Justice wasn't flashy. Justice wasn't quick. Justice was steady, slow, patient. Justice was watching the man who tried to break me face consequences he never thought would touch him. And justice was the peace I felt in my chest knowing I had survived something that once threatened to end me. Not just my marriage, but my spirit. I wasn't healed yet. Healing would come later. But I was standing, upright, breathing, whole. And that, after everything he had tried to do, was the greatest justice of all. After the storm clears, people expect you to go back to normal. They expect you to move on, pick up the pieces, and smooth everything over like it never happened. But nobody warns you that silence after chaos can feel just as heavy as the chaos itself. The house was mine again, legally, peacefully, fully, but it didn't feel like home. Not yet. Not with all the memories still clinging to the walls like old dust. So for a little while, I stayed with Maya. Not because I was scared, but because I needed company that felt like truth. Company that didn't hide knives behind soft words or plot futures without me in them. At her apartment, life moved quietly. Morning coffee together, evening walks, simple dinners, soft lamps instead of harsh overhead lights. Peace felt unfamiliar at first, like wearing a dress I hadn't grown into yet. But day by day, hour by hour, I started feeling my chest loosen in ways I hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, as I sat on Maya's couch with a cup of tea, she rested her head on my shoulder and said, "You know, Mom, you're stronger than you think." I didn't answer right away. I just watched the steam rise from my mug, curling gently in the sunlight coming through the window. Strength wasn't something I had ever claimed for myself. It was something other people told me I had because I endured. But endurance isn't strength. Endurance is survival. Strength is what you find after survival has taken everything it can. And slowly, I was starting to learn the difference. I also joined a support group at the community center near our church. Women my age, older, younger, all carrying stories too heavy to hold alone. We sat in a circle on Wednesday afternoons, paper cups of coffee in hand, sharing pieces of ourselves that had been silent for too long. I didn't talk much at first, just listened. Listened to women who had been lied to, controlled, manipulated, isolated, disregarded, and I realized something powerful. I wasn't the only one who had missed the signs. I wasn't the only one who had trusted too deeply. I wasn't the only one who had loved someone who didn't know how to love back. Pain shared becomes something different, not lighter, but less lonely. One Sunday after service, Mrs. Harding hugged me tightly and said, "Baby, you walked through fire and didn't even smell like smoke. That's God's work." I smiled, genuinely this time. Not because the pain was gone, but because I finally understood that pain had not been the end of my story. It had been the doorway to another chapter. A chapter where I was no longer shrinking myself to make room for a man who wanted to erase me. A chapter where I could breathe again, not in fear, but in hope. A chapter where I belonged to myself. And in the quiet of those weeks between healing and rebuilding, I realized the most important thing of all. I hadn't lost everything. I had lost a man who was never mine to begin with. I had lost a life built on illusions and silence. But I had gained something far more sacred. The woman I used to be before fear taught me to disappear. Sometimes, the most powerful moment in your life isn't when you fight back. It's when you finally walk away. Not running, not hiding, not scrambling for safety, but walking. Steady, whole, unapologetically yourself. The day I finally stepped back into my own house, my house. With the locks changed and the light pouring through the windows, I stood in the center of the living room and let the silence wash over me. Not the fearful silence I once lived with. A new silence. A clean silence. A silence that said, "You survived. You're safe. You're yours again." I touched the wall with my palm, felt its warmth, and whispered, "I'm home." For the first time in years, that sentence didn't feel like a lie. And to anyone listening right now, any woman who feels small or unseen or unheard, I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me sooner. You are not weak because you stayed. You are powerful because you finally saw the truth. And you are unstoppable once you decide you deserve more. Sometimes the truth doesn't break you. Sometimes it frees you. Sometimes it brings you back to yourself after years of being lost in someone else's shadow. I didn't win because he lost. I didn't win because the court chose me. I didn't win because justice showed up. I won because I woke up, because I listened to the daughter who saved my life, because I finally chose myself, fully, fiercely, without apology. And if you're watching this and you're carrying your own quiet pain, I hope you choose yourself too. It's never too late to come home to the woman you were always meant to be.